Well, welcome to today's session on adapting and sustaining food safety. My name is Elizabeth Eckert, and I'm the Chief of Party for the Alliance for Inclusive and Nutritious Food Processing. Liz, you can turn it to the next slide. AINFP is a Feed the Future initiative that works with food processors to enhance the nutritional value, safety, and quality of their product. TechnoServe is the main implementing partner. We are an international nonprofit that promotes business solutions to poverty, and we have deep experience building the growth and resilience of food processors throughout the world. We're in partnership with partners in food solutions. You can go back one slide. PFS links corporate volunteers from a consortium of world-class food companies with entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. And our third partner is ISF Advisors, who are leading our access to finance activities. Now we can move to the next slide. We operate in 5 countries: Ethiopia, Kenya, Malawi, Tanzania, and Zambia. And our approach offers customized technical assistance directly with food processors, as well as sector-wide training. Additionally, we support processors to develop linkages with smallholder farmers for raw material, market new products to base of pyramid consumers, and access finance. A new activity on our program is focused on developing an enabling environment for women to grow their careers and businesses in the food processing sector. In food safety, our technical assistance is focused both at the processing plant and through sector-wide training through our Food Safety Champions course, which is now also being offered digitally online. Please reach out if you'd like to access that. Then we can move to the next slide. It is my honor to turn this panel over to the more than capable hands of our facilitator today, Dr. Peter Kahenya. We have a distinguished panel whom he will introduce. Dr. Kahenya is a food safety expert and food science lecturer at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology. He's been a frequent collaborator and consultant for AINFP for some time, so we're delighted to have him today. And let me turn this over to him to complete his introduction and to lead us into the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Liz, for the very nice introduction. I need not say more. Next slide, Liz. Now, this afternoon, we are here to discuss the very important topic on food safety. And we all agree that food safety cannot be said to be there in any product if you cannot give the assurance that the food will not cause harm to the consumer when it is prepared and or eaten according to its intended use. Therefore, you have to have very good practices, or we have to have specific practices, specific standards, and even activities that you require for you to be able to deliver safe products to your consumers. However, it is important to note that for you to deliver a safe product, you must ensure that each and everyone in your value chain is involved in delivering this quality. You have to work with those who are in production, you have to work with those who are handling the product, you have to work with those who are delivering the product to you, you have to work with those who are processing, those who are distributing, and up to the point of the end consumer. That is the only time that you can guarantee that your product is safe. You must also create a culture within your organization of doing things right. You must always ensure that each and every one of you adopts the way of doing things that can actually deliver that safe product to your organization. That culture can only be created if the top management of the organization is committed. You must also have an understanding of the food safety aspects that you need to manage in your organization. For example, today, our focus is mainly on chemical contaminants, as we shall see. And next slide. And it is important to note that when these chemical contaminants get into a product, they become unsafe. And when they are unsafe, we have issues that sometimes get reported in our media. We have had cases of maize contamination, for example, in my country, Kenya. We've had cases of coverages that have shown that whatever products people are given or sold to were unsafe. And of course, this really affects the customer's confidence on the products that you're selling to them. Some of the issues that have affected our products or the safety of our products include the pesticides or presence of pesticides in our fresh produce, and also the presence of aflatoxins in our dried food products, mainly the flours that we sell in our country. We also have approaches that we can use to manage the safety of our products, starting with the simple good manufacturing practices. However, adoption of more organized systems such as HACCP would really go a long way in solving this problem. And eventually, we will all have been able to convince each other that food safety, as was once written in the standard newspaper, that food safety is vital in achieving food security. To assist us navigate this whole area of how to manage these contaminants, especially the pesticides and aflatoxins, and also how we can leverage HACCP to manage these contaminants, I want to introduce to you a panel of experts that are drawn from very diverse backgrounds and very diverse diversity of countries from Africa. Next slide. Now, the first gentleman that I want to introduce is Robert Kilonzo. He's a project management specialist in charge of the regional market systems and food safety under USAID Kenya and East Africa in the Office of Economic Growth and Integration. Robert is a food safety expert at USAID, Office of the Economic Growth and Integration, and has over 25 years experience in food safety regulation and management of food safety hazards. I actually got to know him when he was working for the Ministry of Health in Kenya. His education background, he has a master's in Master of Science in Food Safety and Quality from the University of Nairobi, and a Bachelor of Science in Environmental Health from Moi University. He has also acquired additional qualifications in food safety from the University of Copenhagen, Denmark, and Obihiro University of Agriculture and Veterinary Medicine from Japan. Professionally, prior to joining USAID, Robert was the Deputy Director Public Health and Head of Division of Food Safety and Quality at the Kenya Ministry of Health, where he led policy formulation, health regulation, and capacity building of county governments. I actually got to know him while he was working there. The next panelist that we have this evening is Mr. Noel Teza Chika, who is a quality assurance manager in a company called Central Poultry 2000 Limited, based in Lilongwe, Malawi. He has over 9 years experience in the food industry and regulatory sector. He specializes in inspections, auditing, food safety. Teza uses his expertise in developing, maintaining, and implementing food safety management systems. These are people that we can gain a lot from. Teza has an education background in food science and technology from the University of Zambia, where he earned his degree. He's also a certified ISO 22018 auditor. He's an animal welfare and slaughter practice trainer and a food safety trainer. A lot of experience we have here. Next is Mr. Anthony Etiang, a senior food processing specialist working for TechnoServe Kenya. Anthony is a senior food processing specialist at TechnoServe with 23 years experience in food technology, helping small and medium enterprises, food processors with technical advisory services to ensure that they are effective in the production of safe and nutritious foods. He specializes in food safety management systems, product development, process development, and coaching and mentoring. Anthony uses his expertise to help food business change their culture in food processing to provide quality products to their consumers. And of course, there can never be quality without safety. Anthony has an education background in food science and technology from the University of Nairobi, where he earned his bachelor's degree. Anthony is also a certified lead auditor in FSSC 22000 and ISO 14001, And in addition, he's a certified green belt in operational excellence. This is under lean manufacturing and Six Sigma. Over the years, Anthony's strengths at TechnoServe under the AINFP program have garnered some recognition by supporting 39 food processors with customized technical assistance and training over 600 food safety champions from 200 farms in Kenya and even beyond. Anthony is skilled in both production and quality assurance and even in environmental matters, and has worked at Nairobi Bottlers, Homegrown, Brookside Dairy Limited, some of the biggest players in the country, spearheading them in establishing new processing lines, food safety management systems, He spent his days thinking of different ways to help small and medium enterprises, food processing businesses grow and become profitable while providing safe food. And that is what keeps him up at night. Lastly, but not the least, we have Ms. Sally Kabwebwe. She is a quality and food safety manager at Java Foods Limited, Zambia. Sally is a quality and food safety manager at Java Foods with 10 years experience helping food manufacturers with developing, implementing, and maintaining systems. She specializes in food technology and also uses her expertise to develop food safety management systems to ensure the production of safe food products. Sally has an education background in food science and technology from the University of Zambia, where she earned a bachelor's degree in food science and technology. Sally is also a certified food safety auditor for the FSSC 22000 standard. Over the years, her strengths at Java Foods have garnered some recognition for achievement of HACCP certification. Finally, Sally is skilled in food technology and systems development and has worked for two of the country's largest meat processors, a regulatory agency, and on projects with United Nations Industrial Development Organizations. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the panel that we have today. Experienced ladies and gentlemen who are willing and are here to share with us their experiences. So without any further ado, I want to take this opportunity and invite the first of these speakers, Mr. Robert. Next slide.
Sure. Thank you very much, Peter. No better way of starting this webinar like the way you have put it. 3 key things: food safety culture, no food security without food safety, no quality without safety. Very key statements there. Now, quickly, I dive into aflatoxin mitigation as one of the key contaminants for discussion in this webinar today. And as we all know, aflatoxins are the major and most potent toxins, and they are cancer-causing agents. We need, what I want to bring on board here to the participants is that there's usually a confusion between aflatoxins and fungus. It's the fungi which causes aflatoxin. And here we are talking of Aspergillus flavus and Aspergillus parasiticus. These are the major fungi, and the contamination happens during pre-harvest and post-harvest, and often within the main crops, which we all know about. Talking about the maize, groundnuts, sorghum, cereal grains, feedstuffs, including cottonseed, macadamia nuts, and all that. And usually when the molds infect the crop, it is at that in time it produces the toxins. And usually 2 parameters have to be at the optimum. That is the moisture content and the temperature. So when we are talking about critical control, we are talking about moisture content and the temperatures. Those are the main things. At the moment, we are not able to eliminate aflatoxin contamination in commodities. The reason is because it is contamination arising from the fungi, and the fungi is with us. And humans are usually exposed mainly through consumption of contaminated agricultural products and animal products, whether you're taking meat, eggs, poultry, and milk. But at this point, I want to say that contamination through the animal products is not highly pronounced as it happens in the agricultural products. Next. So how can we combatively, oops, you've gone ahead. How can we combatively prevent and reduce aflatoxin contamination? The slides are moving. Thank you. Hello.
Sorry about that. It looks like they're timed to move.
Yeah. That is the slide I want. That one, yes.
Sorry. Right. I think we can look at it from there.
Yes, thank you. Because as I have said in the first slide, it's almost impossible to say that you have completely eliminated aflatoxin contamination in your grain or in your food items. In most of the cases, you'll hear use of the ozone, you'll be able to completely eliminate aflatoxin contamination in a food product. Yes, tick, you will be able to do it. But what happens after that? If you take it to a contaminated store, yes, it gets contaminated again. So always the point that should be how to prevent and reduce the contamination level. And in most of the cases, you'll get most of people talking of what I call half the truth by always blaming the climate change. Ideally, it's not only the climate change which is making the contamination so to happen. It's about the practices. And the Codex Alimentarius Commission has set out a general code of practice for member countries to use in order to be able to prevent and reduce contamination levels. And in this code, there are three major points which you need to take note of. And the first principle or the primary line of defense with respect to aflatoxin contamination is the good agricultural practices. Simple as it looks, that is the main treatment. That is the primary line of defense if you want to handle aflatoxin. Because you get it right at the farm, you will be able to control the next critical points of contamination. You'll be able to say, yes, I'll be able to deliver safe product. What it means by a good agricultural practices here, we are getting it straight from the selection of the seed. Plant the correct seed. For example, those in the highlands, and those in the lowlands, you dare plant the seeds meant for the highlands, definitely they will be stressed by the rain if it is a rain-fed farming, and therefore it will not mature enough for it to withstand the attack of the fungi, so that you can have aflatoxin grow, or rather develop in the food. Moving all the way to the weeding, so that you can have strong agricultural products which will be able to withstand an attack, up to storage, up to transportation. All that bit of the agricultural practices, you have literally to get it right. You get it right at the farm, you'll be able now to move to the next steps. And the next step here is the good manufacturing practices. Assuming the private sector, you'll get the grain. You need to know where you're getting your grain from. You need to know where you're getting your raw materials from. You need to have that small control of where you're getting your material. And you have to practice a good manufacturing practice. A good manufacturing practice here, for example, if I take like maize flour, where you're getting your grain, that is your raw material, your first critical control point will be at the reception, where you are receiving your grain, or where you are receiving your raw material. It is at the point you'll be able to test, you'll be able to see whether it is contaminated, whether it is clean, and all that, so that you can be able to say, at this point going forward, yes, I'm done. The reason I include hazard analysis critical control point at this, it is in addition to the primary line of defense, which is agricultural practices and good manufacturing practices, because this is whereby you have to look at critical control points within your processing plant and try to implement them. You'll be able to prevent the contamination as early as possible. Why it is a critical control point, as you'll know later in the discussion by the next presenter, is because if you don't take the measure at that point, you may not be able to prevent it in the next steps. Next point, please. Next slide. Next slide. The role of the government, private sector, and the consumer. Yes, the government provides the enabling environment. It will set the standards and it will implement the standards. If the government will restrict itself into that, therefore they will have played their ball. And then the private sector now dips in because they have the primary responsibility to the food safety. It is the sole responsibility of the private sector to ensure that the food stuff is churning out of the production lines, it's safe. And that is why they bear the primary responsibility of the food safety. The consumer, let me and you do the right thing. Do the good handling practice, the storage practice, and read and follow the manufacturer's label on guidance and product storage and use. Remember, we are talking about a value chain. You may get it right all the way from the start, but the time you are in your house, you store it bad, it gets contaminated. You don't have good storage practices. Then you start blaming the earlier actors up the street. Not the case. Just moved. The slides are really moving so fast. My last point is on what USAID activities or we have heard on aflatoxin over the last 20 years. USAID has been on this space. For example, we got 11 technical papers on aflatoxin and 9 policy briefs on aflatoxin prevention and control done in 2018. And here's the link. You can read them. They are so detailed. They have everything. They are briefs of 2018. They have issues on how do you do harmonization and strengthening of the standards. How do you use biocontrol measures? All this stuff are there in that link. We got other projects or other activities which we have been running on COVID, EATI, Trademark, East Africa, South Africa Trade and Investment Hub. All these are financial and technical assistance programs which have been having the focus on the RECs and the national regulatory agencies and some associations. Currently, we have an ongoing activity, economic reform and recovery activity, that is ERA, and specifically Objective 2, which is very key. It's on an increased capacity of East Africa private sector businesses, associations, national governments, and regional organizations. And the implementing partner here, Trademark East Africa, will be able to look into the national and non-trade barriers, and here it's where aflatoxin lies. We have had which is also ongoing Kenya crop and dairy market systems activity, has also been able to touch on the dairy and also on the feed. Strengthening competitiveness in regional agricultural trade, that is the policy link. There was, this is a study which has very good findings on some of the things or the constraints which we may be having with respect to trade barriers. And major of concern here has been the high trading cost, the cross-border trade barriers, and key to us here is the low productivity, and it is on issues of post-harvest practices which make us have so many losses. There are other upcoming activities which are going on under the Africa Trade and Investment, which we have a solicitation going on. This is a work in procurement, and this is specifically on aflatoxin. Thank you, and over.
Thank you so much, Robert. Thank you for taking us through that session. I want to request Mr. Teza to take over and take us through the pesticide control, pests and pesticides control. Thank you so much. We are running a little bit behind time, so kindly try to manage them. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm going to present to you about pest control. So understanding pest control and pesticide residues, that is what we'll discuss. So first and foremost, we will have to learn what is a pest, because for us to know and how to manage these pesticide residues and to manage pests, we need to know what they are. So a pest is something or any living organism. It could be an animal, it could be a microorganism, it could be a plant that is considered as a pest that could have a negative effect on a human being or humans. So when we talk about pesticide, a pesticide is basically a chemical that is used to destroy or kill the pests. Okay? So now we break down, when we go to pesticide residues, what are pesticide residues? We're saying we have a pest that is killed by or destroyed by a pesticide, which is a chemical. So now those traces of the chemicals used, the active ingredient of those pesticides, of that chemical that you have used, those traces after being applied on the farm or rather in the food within our factory, those traces are what we call pesticide residues. Okay, so all these things, this treatment of application of pesticide residues and management of pests forms up a program that we need to come up with, which is known as a pest control. Okay. So now this pest control program, a good pest control program needs to be based on an integrated pest management, okay, which has a precept of prevention is better than cure. Why do they use that precept is better, prevention is better than cure? Because there are three things that we have to look at there when we are managing a pest, when we are running a pest control program. We have to deny the entry, deny food, and deny shelter of the pest. So a pest control program, basically, these are activities that are outlined in order for us to manage our identified pests within our establishment, within the factory, and around the premises outside, which is based on an integrated pest management program. So an integrated pest management program, this one involves a number of activities that will ensure us to effectively control these pests and also manage our pesticides. Okay. We need to also know that when we are at a facility, our main goal is to limit the use of harmful substances, which are known as the pesticides or the pesticides, because these are the source of pesticide residues that cause harm to our consumers after buying our food or consuming our food. All right. So the key point here is that pest control reduces the risk of live pests within the factory. And the pest control measures that we apply, we need to understand that the issues such as dead rodents, insects, which are equally hazardous to our consumers. So pest control in itself is potentially hazardous to the process and must be carefully implemented and monitored. So let's quickly go through the principles of pest control based on an integrated management system. First of all, when we want to implement a pest control program, we need to do an identification of pests. During this identification of pests, we are going to look at where are these pests coming from? What type of pests are we dealing with? Because the various establishments that we come from have different pests. where I come from, or where environments that I've worked with different pests. If you are others in the meat industry, that's got different pests that you are associated there. And then when you are in a flour industry or a dry area, milling industry, all those have got different pests that present themselves at each establishment. So therefore, we need to identify these pests, know their sources, and know how we are able to treat them. So then the second precept we are supposed to look at is the inspection. Okay. So what are we inspecting? We have to inspect and check for the sources of these pests, where they are coming from. We have to look at a lot of factors during our inspections. Those factors will include issues of how is the facility itself designed. We have to look at any openings within the facility that could lead to pests entering our plant. Are we having a place where our pests could breed? Okay. So we have to identify those areas through our inspection. And also through our inspection, it enables us to see if there are any new pests that are presenting themselves due to different seasons that pests can come in. So we need to do our effective inspection on that on our premises. Then the second thing we have to look at is the sanitation. How is the sanitation? Because remember, this is an integrated pest management system. So the sanitation of the plant would highlight issues that would look at the food sources, habitats, the protection, these food sources that pests could get attracted to. Do we have those food sources that would lead to pests present themselves? Because if we have a poor sanitation area, definitely we are going to provide food sources for these pests and they'll come into our facilities. Thus, the sanitation programs that are coming into play, where we need to effectively clean our factories, we need to make sure that we put things in order. We don't have to put things that would harbor the pests within the factory. And then also sanitation issues would be looking at how are we doing our waste management, because waste, where we keep our waste, where we throw our waste, is a source as well of pests. So those are areas that during our inspection and identification, they need to look at which areas are we lacking. Are we not cleaning our facilities adequately to remove out all those organic materials within the processing, around our equipment, around the waste area? It could be in drainages. So those areas would be a source of pests coming into the plant. So we need to monitor such, we need to inspect so that we come up with an effective pest control program. And this usually is what is more effective in terms of managing of pests and looking at our pest control program. Then during this process of integrated pest management, we look at the monitoring. How are we going to monitor these pests? How are we able to check that our pests are reducing, or we are having an increase of infestation of pests in our processing plants or around the area?
Noel, I will request that you summarize, please.
Okay, so let me just summarize. All right, so during that processing, we've got mechanical and chemical treatments of our pests. Okay, so the chemical treatment, these are the pesticides that we have. So the key thing that we need to know there is that we need to have approved pesticides that are approved by our regulatory institutes, so that we need to use them at our plant. So the next thing is the mode of application. How are we applying these pesticides? We need to make sure that the fumigation is done in a sound manner, our food is protected, and after the application of these things, we need to make sure that the withdrawal period is observed. How long, according to what the manufacturer has described on the label, we follow the dilutions and the period that the chemical should be used. And then after that period elapses, and we can withdraw. But make sure after withdrawal, whenever you are fogging or spraying, the premises have to be cleaned to make sure that these pesticide residues do not present themselves in the food. The other thing during management of this, we have to communicate to our employees, which is very key, that we educate our employees in terms of the practices that we have to see. Because we have to prevent our pests from entering our premises, we need to keep door closed. So some of the employees need to have got a tendency of just leaving the doors open, thus letting flies, cockroaches penetrating into our premises. So that education is very important to our employees, and also telling them to ensure that they report any pests that is observed where they are working from within their facility. So we need to know that this is a very good practice that employees should adhere to in order to have an effective pest control program. So what impacts does it have on our business? These pests spread microorganisms, they spread diseases, they cause illnesses to our consumers, especially the pesticide. When you have pesticide residues, they cause illness to our consumers. There was a case that happened recently, I think sometime last year in Zambia, over pesticide residues. They are a source of contamination, these pests. So we need to make sure that we manage them. They damage the equipment, they damage the company reputation and loss of consumers. Because we always want to stay in business, we have to make sure that the prosecution is avoided through an effective program. Yeah. So other benefits of making sure that we have this effective program is to ensure to minimize the returns of products if they are infested on the market, if it's a pest control complaint. So we need to minimize this pest control or the complaints related to pests, because it's quite devastating for a customer to see a pest in the food and then basically they'll switch to other brands. So those are some of the benefits of having an effective pest control program. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Noel, for the very elaborate discussion around the pests and the pesticides. And without any further ado, I want to invite the next speaker, Mr. Etiang, to continue. Thank you so much, Noel.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kaenya. Thank you for the rest of the panelists. Thank you, attendees, for this session. I'll briefly talk about HACCP in the shortest time possible. HACCP, different words are used for it, but this is one of the definitions by FAO. HACCP is a management system which under food safety addresses through the analysis and control of biological, chemical, and physical hazards. Under this now we've incorporated, allergens as one of the major hazards. And these hazards may come from raw materials, production, procurement, handling, to manufacturing, distribution, and consumption of the processed food. HACCP, if you break it down, is the hazard that can cause harm. I think we've talked about pesticides and aflatoxins. Analysis is investigating where they would come from. Critical is a point or a process step within your factory where critically beyond that point, you are unable to contain the hazard, and therefore that point becomes a critical control point. Control, of course, is the different measures you deploy, the different activities you deploy to reduce that hazard to an acceptable level or eliminate it. And the points are, in your production flow process, at which points within your production flow are you able to manage those hazards? What is key about HACCP is it takes away, as we move to the next slide, it takes away the need to, it gives you the ability to focus on areas of concern within your facility, and therefore, manage resources under which you are able to control hazards. This is just a brief history of HACCP, and as you can see, it has really evolved over time. When it was started in the 1960s, most situations or most companies relied on what we call end product testing. If you process a ton of your product and tested it at the end of the process, and you find that it's not conforming, you have to dump, the 1 ton, you have to pay for your staff. And so through this, NASA and Pillsbury came up with the HACCP concepts, initially with 3 principles, looking at how to minimize the risk of foodborne disease for those who are traveling to space. And that's how it was developed. Through the years, there have been various, standards that have been developed around HACCP, to the point where even for us who are in East Africa, we now have our own East African standard, 151-2000, that speaks about HACCP. But one thing I would encourage audiences, those who are not familiar with HACCP, is to look for the Codex standard. I think it's CXC01, that is free to download, and we'll take you through, the principles of HACCP, because Codex has done a very good job at ensuring, there are standards available out there to refer to, and a lot of our own, standards within our countries always go back to Codex to compare and contrast. Next slide. It's worth noting that, HACCP does not stand alone. HACCP relies on some of the principles that Robert had alluded to: good agricultural practices, good manufacturing practices, and good hygienic practices. HACCP requires these as the foundation to ensure that it's effective. And as you proceed on up the pyramid, you can see that HACCP has now, been included in a lot of these standards, because one of the realizations is, HACCP needs other supporting structures and other supporting systems. Food safety culture is now, the main discussion point around the ensuring that food safety systems, food safety standards are maintained and managed. Management commitment, again, a key focus area for food safety, and that requires us to be management to commit to and support areas within the facility, ensure that there is proper investment. As we move to the next slide, as I come to a conclusion, there are benefits related to HACCP that you can see there. What is key is that, at the end of the day, we need to manage and run profitable businesses. And it's important that to ensure that as we run those businesses, we invest in food safety to ensure that our reputation is upheld, to ensure that we are compliant to the requirements, and also to ensure that our consumers are safe from any contamination that may have entered our products. Finally, HACCP again needs to, if you move to the next slide, HACCP requires us to continually improve on it. As I mentioned, if you look at the history and the way HACCP has evolved, it requires continuous improvement, it requires continuous investment, it requires continuous knowledge acquisition by the teams who are implementing it. This is a common tool, and this is also part of the principles around the ISO 22000 PDCA cycle, which looks at the loop, closing the loop, and a lot of businesses looking at food safety or even different aspects within production fail at the point of part 3, check and act. And when they fail, you fail to close that loop. You continue with recurring issues within your facility, but being able to adopt various practices through internal audits, through deploying root cause analysis teams, and aspects like that, you are able to continually close the loop. And HACCP also requires this level of diligence and intervention and processes to be able to ensure that there are improvements in the process of HACCP. I think I'll hand it over back to Peter to introduce the next speaker. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Anthony, for the very clear elaboration of HACCP. You've simplified HACCP so much that it seems like it can easily be implemented. Now, to give us a deeper insight into the implementation of HACCP at workplace, I want to invite Sally, the only lady who is taking us through this session this afternoon, the second lady, sorry, who's taking us through this afternoon to continue and delve deeper into HACCP. Welcome, Sally.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, Anthony, for that great elaboration on the HACCP system. Basically, I'm going to talk about the Java experience with certification to HACCP systems. And like Anthony mentioned, we simply use the Codex guidelines, which you can see on your screen there. To be able to set up the HACCP system, we did two main things. We implemented the preliminary steps, which are divided into 5 points, and we implemented the 7 HACCP principles. So typically what we did was assemble a HACCP team, which was composed of a multidisciplinary team, members of staff within our organization who came from the production team, from the warehouse team, from quality control, from maintenance, and from HR. And it's this team that are largely responsible for the day-to-day administration of the HACCP system. After the assembling the team, we described the product. We produce instant noodles at Java Foods. So we went about just noting down the chemical composition, gave a physical description, the acceptable biological characteristics of the product, and other regulatory information like regulatory acts that we need to adhere to and storage conditions for the product. We also went about identifying the intended use, who is going to consume our instant noodles, and we wrote this down to the most detailed point. We also constructed a flow diagram, and for us at Java, this was easy because about half of the HACCP team is composed of the operators who work on the production line every day. And constructing the flow diagram meant looking at each and every production step, from receiving of the raw material to dispatch of the final product at the end of the day. After construction of the flow diagram, this HACCP team went on the ground on the production process to verify the flow diagram. And typically at Java, we have about 30 process steps, and these process steps can vary from business to business depending on the product and the type of processing that you're undergoing. In our case, there were 30 process steps, and the team went on the ground looking at each and every process step, verifying that what we have on paper in our HACCP study is actually what's on the ground in the factory. When we finished the 5 preliminary steps, we launched now into the actual hazard analysis, where for the 30 identified process steps, we now thought of how we produce every day and the different hazards that could be introduced into the process in those 30 process steps. And the hazards could vary in nature. These could be chemical hazards, the aflatoxins that we're talking about, the pesticides that we're talking about. They could be physical hazards, and they could be biological in nature. After identifying these hazards, we used the risk assessment tool to be able to identify which ones were significant, using an assessment template that allows to assess the likelihood and severity for one particular hazard. And it's this tool that allowed us to determine the points in the process that were critical, like Anthony mentioned, where if control is lost, we are definitely sure to produce products that are not safe and could harm the consumer. An example I can give for CCPs, because initially when we conducted our HACCP study, we had 2 CCPs. And recently, after a review, we've downgraded one cooking CCP, and we now have only one CCP. So in order to establish critical limits for a CCP, a typical critical limit is cooking, and critical limits for this would be a time temperature combination, say a range of between 90 and 100 degrees Celsius, cooking for a specific period of time, 100 seconds, for instance. And this information was documented in the study. We also established a monitoring system, and this would entail an operator being responsible to periodically, say once every hour, once every 30 minutes, to go and look at the cooking equipment and check that the temperature is actually at 100 and we've cooked for the specified 100 seconds. We also establish corrective actions. So this operator who's monitoring this critical control point at cooking then has to be given this information on what he does when the temperature is below 90 degrees Celsius or when the temperature is above 100 degrees Celsius, because then that is going to impact the safety of the product. And all of these monitoring system, corrective action, critical limits that were established were documented in the study. We also documented verification procedures, and typically this means for the cooking process where we're cooking our instant noodles at 100 degrees, we have to come up with a system to go and verify and confirm by someone independent from the operator who's monitoring that CCP, someone to go and confirm that indeed you've cooked at 100 and it's adequate, you've eliminated all the biological hazards that need to be taken care of at that point. And for all of these 11 steps that we've talked about, all of this has to be documented. Standard operating procedures were developed, and for each standard operating procedure, we had associated records which allow us to prove that a particular activity had taken place. And in this way, this information we on the HACCP study we use on a day-to-day basis every time we're producing the noodle to assure that the customer is getting a safe food product. We can move to the next slide. I also wanted to share on the specific activities that we've put in place to control and prevent contaminants, and just to share with the panel that these activities will differ from business to business. And that's why when you put in a HACCP study, you can't really copy and say company A manufactures noodles and has this control measures in place to control pesticides, and this is what I'm going to do. You need to assemble the team, you need to do the risk assessment, you need to do the study and determine what's relevant to your business. So for example, here at Java, to control aflatoxins and pesticides, we rely on those two methods, good methods that we've used over the period that we've been in production. The first is quality control at receiving of raw materials, because for us, aflatoxin and pesticides can only be introduced in the raw materials that we use. The raw materials that we use are coming from a manufacturer from different parts of the region, and these manufacturers are getting their raw materials from primary producers. And so when we do quality control at receiving of these raw materials, we have developed in-house specifications for the raw materials. We have detailed the chemical, physical, biological composition that we want our raw materials to have, and we have stipulated the acceptable level of aflatoxin and pesticides. And when we receive our raw materials, we will check against the COA. We will not accept a raw material that doesn't have a certificate of conformance. For certain parameters, we are actually able to do on-the-spot checks, lab testing checks, to confirm that our raw material is conforming to our specification or our requirements. Another big important activity that we use here at Java to control the different contaminants is the quality assurance activities. Typically for materials like aflatoxin and pesticides, we will do supplier management activities. Around audits, we periodically visit our suppliers and just audit them, do an inspection, go around their production facility, look at documentation to confirm that they are adhering to our requirements for hygiene. We would also monitor the performance of suppliers. So over time, over a period of time, say a year, we would document every time that we receive raw materials from this supplier, and we'll score them against a certain scorecard. And this information will be given to the supplier and used to evaluate whether this supplier remains on our approved supplier list. Another important supplier management tool that we use is supplier approval. So we don't typically want to just pick raw materials from any supplier. The supplier has to go through a vetting process. Before being onboarded as an approved supplier, there'll be an initial visit to the production facility. Documentation and requirements will be shared with the supplier, and all of this information communicated so that the supplier is aware
Sally, we've lost you. Sally, can you hear me? Sally, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Sorry for that. I'm having tech issues and I broke off for a bit there. Can you hear me now?
Yes, kindly we can hear you. You can summarize
Sure.
now.
Thank you. So I was saying the benefits are many. The two immediate ones that we saw were reduction in what we call non-conformances and also a reduction in customer complaints. A non-conformance is a deviation from a process that we observe in-house in Java before we finish with the noodle and send it out to the customer. A customer complaint by definition is a defect in the product that will be seen either by our agent or our customer or by the final consumer. So we've seen a reduction in both of these when we compare the information from 2021 to 2022. And this has confirmed that our HACCP system is working and it's effective. We have also seen an expanded access to regional markets. We've been currently supplying to Zimbabwe and Malawi, but now the HACCP certification opens up more opportunities for us to expand to other countries in the region, which we're very happy about as well. Another aspect that I wanted to share on HACCP was just the impact of implementation of HACCP on the costs. Teza, the previous speaker, talked about pest control and waste management and some of the other good manufacturing practices that need to be implemented and done on a periodic basis whenever you produce. So these good manufacturing practices do come at a recurring operating expense or cost. And also we found that we spent quite a lot in terms of capital expenditure in preparation for this food safety system. And this tends to raise the cost of production. And this is why we find it very imperative to encourage all of our different suppliers to adhere to like-minded standards in order to just raise the bar in the country and in the region. If everyone's producing safe food, good quality food, there'll be less waste on the market, there'll be less customer complaints, and there'll be very good food available for the population. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Sally, for making HACCP implementation so clear. We, as participants, I'm sure we've gained a lot in terms of getting to understand the basics of the HACCP and even how an organization has managed to implement the same, and even the benefits, highlighting the benefits. Thank you so much, Sally. Now we only have 1 minute remaining. We had purpose to be here for only 1 hour, but I have noticed that there are quite a number of questions that the participants have posed to the panel, and the panel would want to address these questions comprehensively. So what we are suggesting for the questions that you posted, we're going to be replying to them. Those that have not been replied to on this chat, we are going to be sending them together with the presentation. There has been some request for the presentation to be shared. So as was communicated earlier, it will actually be shared. And together with these will be the responses to some of the questions that you've asked. However, we would also want to indulge you. Would it be okay if we extended by another 10 minutes so that this panel can also expound some very few areas that they've mentioned that we would want to hear from them? We would want to hear their reaction to certain issues that we think they could be of help to us. If you are okay with extending for another 10 to 15 minutes, would it be possible? Could you show by clicking on raise your hand so that we can see how many of us would be comfortable extending for another 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. Liz, you can confirm for me how many of us could have raised their hands?
Yes, we have people showing interest to stay over. We have beyond 60 people, so I think we can
60 people. Okay. That means that surely we have a critical mass that would want to proceed for the next 10 to 15 minutes. So we are promising that we would want to end this at exactly 15:15 because you've given us mandate for another only 15 minutes. And to probably get us going, I would want to start this off by asking Robert, for example, to share from your experience what you think is working and what you think is also not working in managing food safety practices. From your experience, having worked with so many organizations, having worked with the government, what do you think from your experience we can tap into? What do you think is that which is working, and as practitioners we can tap into? And what do you think is not working and therefore we should avoid?
Sure, thank you, Peter. I'll go this one very fast. Out of my experience, what I think is working when it comes to food safety, number one is to approach the food safety hazard with the value chain in mind, looking at all that way from the production to the table, or to the spoon or the fork. If you have a value chain approach to whatever contaminant you are looking at, you'll be able to quickly pinpoint the critical control points explained by Sally, whereby your effort is needed, so that you don't waste a lot of your resources into fighting and implementing measures which are not assisting you at all. So a value chain approach is a sure way that you'll find yourself somewhere. Second, have a private sector lens to any food safety hazard or problem you're trying to manage. Why? Remember, the private sector is the one who has the responsibility on the food safety of the final product, which the consumer is going to take. If you restricted the government to do the regulation, enabling environment and all that, and you have the lens of facilitating the private sector to make those interventions which will make the food safe, that works. You try to do it without the private sector, no, you will be just chasing wind. For example, a government regulator in a novice, you don't know what is happening in the processing lines. So if you have a lens of the private sector and you bring the private sector to all what you're doing, you're likely to get it right. The other point, what I have seen working from the development side, from where I am, is having what we call collaborating, learning, and adapting. Whom do you collaborate with? I've seen a question here in the Q&A. Whom do you collaborate with? Always try to look in and out. Try to have your internal collaborators and your external collaborators, because all these two, they will have a part to play. Look internally, whom do you need internally? Look externally, other than the government, you may need even the consumer. All those people, if you collaborate with them, then you are almost to be sure you'll be able to have a better way of managing. Learning. Try to learn from the past. Try to learn what has worked elsewhere. Already, Sally has tried to explain how they've been able to learn, and they've been able to make some changes into their ASAP way of doing things in their organization. Until now, they are seeing increase in production, increase in revenue and all that, because they have tried to learn. Try to learn as much as possible, because when you learn, you are likely to get new ideas. You're likely to find yourself, this is what you needed to change, and adapt those measures which you think are able to solve the problem. What I have seen not working is always what you call regulatory policing. It's whereby you're sort of like chasing the private sector. That will not assist you, because the private sector will be there. But if you are sort of like policing or the private sector, there will be not that cordial relations. And the other thing is whereby you will always collect a sample and test. The question I have for you is, so what do you do with the results? Sometimes you are testing, but you are testing for what? Do you want to test and throw away, or you want to test to confirm whether the chain has been working? The important part of testing, and the reason why you should make a test, is because you want to pinpoint in a system where an error could have occurred and where you needed to do it. Yes, that is a bit of what I think as I have seen work and what I've seen not work. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I have picked 3 very important things that you've highlighted that you've seen work. And one of them is the involvement of the private sector, that ownership. You remember we started by saying that for food safety to work, there must be collaboration, there must be teamwork, there must be engagement. You've also talked about learnings. They are learning from what has already happened. And I think Sally also emphasized this a lot. The things they had learned before helped them to implement the system and move on. And talking of Sally, to you, I would want to understand what do you think is missing this time in regard to the support for the industry to embrace food safety culture? What do you think is missing? What do you think can be done for the industry to adopt the food safety culture?
Thanks, Peter, for that. So one of the big ones that we see even from other businesses in the country is management commitment. I spoke towards the end of my presentation about the huge investment costs required, both capital expenditure and recurring operating expenses every day that production happens. So where there is no management commitment, we normally find that even the food safety culture is very weak, and implementation gets next to impossible. So one of the big things that I would vouch for actually is management commitment. The rest of it would now just be secondary.
You've highlighted 2 very important things: management commitment, which then translates to availability of resources. Without the resources, as you had highlighted earlier, the system will not work. And to Teza, as a food processor, what do you think, or how do you think you can be able to support your people, especially those working with you as a quality assurance manager, to adopt the food safety management practices, especially those who are working with you to deliver the raw materials and those who are working with you to deliver the products to the consumers? That means both upstream and downstream. Very briefly, what can you do?
Thanks, Peter. So what can be done there is that we need to emphasize to our clients, or our suppliers rather, to say we are into delivering a safe product to our people. So they have to make sure that we communicate to them on what requirements that we need to ensure that when they bring those raw materials, the intended quality or safety of the product that we want to process meets the requirements of the regulations. So in the sense, like, for example, we are looking at the pesticide residues and other things. So we need to tell them to say, this is the limit that we accept, and you have to work with that. So we need to make sure that we support them in visiting the suppliers, like doing an audit on what they are doing, seeing the process, and encourage them where they are missing the point. Okay. So when it looks to our people in the factory there, we need to ensure that the practice of delivering a safe food and food safety culture is everyone's responsibility. We have to communicate to them the importance of delivering a safe product to the consumer and embracing these practices that lead to processing a safe product, and to highlight the disadvantages safe. So the practices need to be adopted and they all have to be supported by everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Noel, on that very insightful thought. You have highlighted to us that we need to communicate clearly to those who are supplying us. They need to know exactly what we need. We need to have specifications, as Sally had said before. We also need to communicate to our people so that they understand how to handle our products. We need to create that knowledge. We need to have clear communication with the people upstream and downstream. Thank you so much for that. Finally, Anthony, ANFP, you've said, has been funding, has been assisting organizations to establish systems and to manage food safety in different aspects. Now, having worked with ANFP for this period of time, what would you say that funders and other technical assistance partners can do to best support the adoption of food safety management practices? What are some of the learnings that you have brought in that you could say, if the funders or technical assistance partners were to adopt these practices, the rate of adoption of food safety management practices in the organizations would increase? Anthony.
Thank you, Peter, for that question. I'll speak primarily around technical assistance, which is our key focus area. Again, one thing to note, change is constant, and a lot of businesses, some have been in business for a number of years and have survived, so to speak. So when we start to engage them, is to help them try and understand that there are opportunities for improvement within their business. What are those opportunities? There are changes in legislation that they need to start working towards. And being there as experts to support them, we provide that technical expertise. But what is fundamental is, and has been mentioned by several here, Sally and Robert, is management commitment. Our TA starts with the management team. Before we engage, anyone else within the factory, starts with the management team to understand what is the need for, technical assistance. What are those technical assistance aspects that we can provide? And again, what is the involvement of the management team as we provide the technical assistance? Because you can walk into a facility, have the manager just hand you over to, the QA or the production person, and the production person thinks you're there to sort of pick issues about their performance, and therefore, you have a closed door in terms of gaining information. So it's important that, we work through the management team, and we work with the management team to ensure that TA is provided. And through that, we tend to see a lot of adoption, because once, the teams on the ground start seeing the management team is interested in, the HACCP training, the management team is interested in good manufacturing practice training, that is when you start seeing traction in terms of what you're doing. The other aspect is on provision of resources, and this again goes back to, the management team providing resources, both financially and also human resource, because you need the right people on the ground to be able to implement some of the practices that are required. That requires, one, recruiting the right people. Two, even if you have the right people, the question is, are they competent enough to be able to implement some of the food safety practices and the various, technical support advice that we have provided for them? Are you involved in terms of, ensuring that they are trained on various aspects? And I think it's important that, the cost-benefit analysis of investing in technical aspects comes out very clearly in the engagement, such that the business can actually see that there is a benefit towards spending a little extra money on doing certain aspects around adoption. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anthony. From that, we've picked a few very important pointers as we work with the partners. We need to ensure that we've created understanding with the top management. We need to ensure there is top management commitment. We also want to make sure that there is the right establishment, the right people for the job. those that can be able to handle the issues that you won't handle. And finally, you must always sell the benefit. What is the cost benefit analysis? So I want to take this opportunity and thank each and every one of us who took their time and joined us for this webinar. I hope it has been as informative to you as it has been to me. And like I said, there are quite a number of questions, very many questions, very technical questions. We are going to address each and every of these questions, and we shall include this in the presentation or in the notes that we shall be sharing with the participants. I want to give this back to Liz for the final comment. Liz?
Thank you, Dr. Kenya. Thank you, Robert, Peza, Anthony, and Sally for sharing your insightful thoughts today. I want to reiterate that we will be sending out the slides to all the registered participants, and we'll also be sending answers to your questions that you've been putting into the Q&A. So thank you very much to our panelists. Thank you to everyone who has joined today, and particularly the robust Q&A discussion, as well as staying 15 minutes over the hour. So with that, thank you very much. Have a great day, and stay tuned for the next webinar from AINFP. We typically share through LinkedIn.
Bye everyone, and thank you so much for joining.